So welcome to our webinar tonight with Madeleine Henry and Lauren Margolin. Really pleased you could join us this evening. Before we get started, we're just going to kind of go over some administrative things. First, there's 3 libraries hosting this program tonight. I'm Roz Topolsky with the Vernon Area Library.
I'm Grace Hayek at Glencoe.
And hi from Highland Park, I'm Beth Keller, and welcome.
So tonight we're using a webinar format for our program. So that means you should just be able to see all of our faces, but we cannot see you. But please, communicate with us by using the chat. We'd be happy to get your questions answered at the end of the conversation by putting your question in there. You might notice we have closed captioning on the bottom of your screen. We just are doing that now to kind of make sure our programs are accessible to everyone. So if you don't care for the captions, if you'd rather turn them off, you can go to the bottom of your screen if you're using a laptop or a computer, and it says live captioning, and you can select hide subtitle or show subtitle if you want to bring it back. Alternatively, if you're using an iPad or an iPhone, it'll be at the top of your screen. There's kind of 3 dots and a more, and there's webinar settings there where you can turn on and off closed captioning. We are recording tonight's program, so that means it'll be up on our library YouTube channels by next week.
My turn?
Yeah.
Okay. I'd like to remind everyone that the Love Proof is available for purchase through the Book Bin, the wonderful independent bookseller in Northbrook. A purchase link is in the chat if you'd like to use it, or you can borrow it from your local library. Tonight's conversation with Madeleine Henry will be moderated by Lauren Margolin. Well known as the Good Book Fairy, Ms. Margolin has made a career out of her love of reading and learning. She facilitates book discussions, speaks at civic and community events, and blogs about books at goodbookfairy.com. Thank you for taking this role in our event tonight, Ms. Margolin. I'll let you take it from here.
Great. Okay, so we're going to start now. First of all, thank you to all of the libraries that are hosting this. It's always lovely to get authors to the public to hear their story. And of course, I greatly enjoy it as well as an avid reader. So Madeleine is the author of 2 novels. Her second novel, which is the one we are going to talk about tonight, The Love Proof, is having its 2nd-month birthday tomorrow. So happy 2-month birthday. Her first book was called Breathe In and Cash Out, and that came out, I think, July in 2019 or August 2019?
July, yeah.
Okay, great. So The Love Proof was selected by the New York Times as a new and noteworthy book and has been featured in the Washington Post, the New York Post, Parade, and several others. It is really a great and different story than something that you imagine it's going to be. It's got a lot of depth, a lot. Love Proof, I wore hearts because yes, love is a big theme in the book, but it is also a much deeper story. So I just highly recommend it if you haven't read it. And I will do my best to avoid all spoilers so that you can kind of go into it a little bit more open-minded. So before becoming a full-time author, and are you a yoga master or a yoga artist? What is your?
I think it would be the most yoga mindset would to always be a beginner. So I would never say I'm a yoga master, but I've done a lot of yoga in my life.
Okay, so she's just like a yoga guru. And she worked directly out of college from Yale in 2014. So you guys can figure out how young she is. It's amazing. So she, right directly when she graduated in 2014, she went right into Goldman Sachs as investment banking. And you all know those kind of stories. So that kind of is what her first book focuses on, which we'll talk about in a quick sec. So anyone who's seen a Good Book Fairy interview knows I always ask about fun facts. And Madeleine shared with me that she lives in New York City and that her and her fiance love to travel and that their favorite trip so far was hiking in Argentina, which just sounds absolutely glorious. And this one I was like really happy to hear. She performed sketch comedy in a college troupe called Outside Joke, which is a great name. So obviously knowing that we can gather some of your personality, that you were able to just put it out there and have fun with it. So we love knowing that about you. So thank you for those fun facts. So
Thank you for asking for them. I loved that. That was very fun.
yeah, it's always, you should, over the years, there's been some doozies, but yours are so good. They're just good and basic. So your first book deals with a female investment banker who graduates from Princeton, goes to work at a big firm, but has this dream of opening a yoga studio, which is kind of similar, certainly doesn't mirror you, but it certainly relates to the path you took when you left Goldman Sachs and, started your practice in yoga. So that follows the premise about write what you know. So what was it that made you turn to something like the Love Proof, which has a lot of science and a lot about love in it?
Great question. And before I answer it, I would just like to say thank you so much, Lauren, for being here with me tonight. I'm so excited for this conversation, and I follow you on Instagram.
Pleasure.
I'm a big fan. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
So wonderful question. The Love Proof, for those who aren't familiar with it, is about a physics prodigy who tries to prove that the ones we love are always connected to us. And she starts out the story, Sophie Jones, as a very analytical, quantitative, introverted, and isolated young woman. And she's on track to unlock the secrets of space and time. And then when she arrives at Yale, she meets a man and falls very deeply in love. And this relationship changes her. And she undergoes a radical transition, because while formerly she thought that time was the most important and least understood thing in the universe, now she thinks love is the most important and least understood thing in the universe. And so she undergoes this really radical transition. And I actually do, believe it or not, also mine my own life for inspiration for this book. So my background, as you alluded to, is I started out working in finance, and it was a very quantitative, analytical, relatively isolated existence. And then as soon as I sold my first book, I quit, I took a leap of faith, and I started to write this book, which is an extremely emotional, visceral, moving love story. And it was a really radical transition, similar to the one that Sophie goes through when she completely changes her life. And so I do draw from that period in crafting how a physics prodigy might fall in love. And so there is that element of inspiration in the story. This story is also set at Yale. So I attended Yale, and I wanted the setting to be that school, because at the core of this story, there is an exploration of the idea of permanent love. And so I thought it would be wonderful for the setting to echo that. And Yale is a place where change is less frequent, like most people's colleges. It honors traditions. And so I do draw from my own life, but not as directly for this story.
Okay. So at the beginning, when we first meet Sophie, we understand that she goes to school wanting to talk about seeing time. And that to me, science and math, that's not my thing. I'm all about, the language and arts. And so I thought, wow, can you see time? Was that something, of course I Googled, can you see time? And you can't at the moment, but I was curious where that seeing time came from.
Well, I wanted Sophie at the beginning to be concerned with the building blocks of the universe. And I wanted her to be on this track that was really captivating and scientific, that would take the reader along and teach them things as well. And time is one of the building blocks of the universe. It's fused with space in the space-time continuum, making up our reality. And so I thought, okay, time is going to be Sophie's ground of exploration, because it is so important to our reality. And I wanted to entice readers with this new view of it, and because it has never been framed as a visual thing. And so I thought, okay, this will be interesting. This will get people's attention and entice them along the story, because it promises revelations about something that is so crucial to the fabric of our universe.
Before I keep going, because I just realized I was going to right now jump right into the time and concept in the book and versus the love concept in the book. But when you were published, you were still working, so you were right out of school. Can you just tell us, because I know people are going to ask, how was your publishing journey, especially at a young age when books are just, there's such a plethora, and during quarantine, even more authors have decided to write books. So I'm just curious how that went for you.
That is a wonderful, wonderful question. I have always wanted to write novels since I was a tot. I've loved language. I kept journals of words that I liked. I entered spelling bees. I wrote books when I was 9. I wrote books in 3rd grade. This has been a very specific interest for a long time. And in college, I actually invented a course where I could write a novel for credit. So I thought, I want to get published, but I have to take so many darned classes. So I thought, why not make one of those classes my novel class? And so I emailed the head of the English department, and I created this course, wrote 2 novels senior year. I queried agents cold, and which is something that every aspiring novelist is familiar with. No responses. I start as an investment banker. I continue to write on the side. And this time I changed my idea. So I'd written 2 science fiction novels previously. And what I realized is that it was hard to break in because I was an unknown writing about unknowns. And so I thought, okay, I need to be more strategic with my idea. And so I decided to set my next book in a fictional investment banking world, writing as an investment banker. And that was tapping into an existing place. It had an audience built in, and it was not as unknown. It was much more commercial. And it also captured this cultural moment of office angst against Instagram lifestyle jobs, which it was very timely. And so I had this commercial idea, and then this time when I queried agents, again, same process, 3rd time, I had responses. And I think I didn't become a better writer. I just mined a more fruitful subject. Interesting.
So my question, how have you evolved as a writer between books, is going to be then that answer.
Well, between Breathe In, Cash Out and Love Proof is a whole other journey, because I wrote Breathe In, Cash Out while working full-time in finance, which means that my emotional disposition at every point was basically terror. So right. I was extremely busy. I was constantly terrified, and I was working these crazy hours. And it's funny how your emotional bandwidth changes depending on your job. So when I was that busy, I had a reduced ability to feel deeply. And so I think that in writing Allegra's story in Breathe In, Cash Out, she is very sassy and sarcastic, and she is bitingly funny. And I think that the emotional depth that you see in the Love Proof is very different. It is a very earnest, sincere, it's tender love story about vulnerabilities between people and tough decisions. And I think that that's because I wrote it as a full-time writer, where my emotional bandwidth was so much greater, and I just had the ability to care about these characters that I did not have previously. So right. That's not to say Breathe In, Cash Out is not a good book. It's to say that it is a completely different genre, and it's very much in the head. And in the Love Proof, it's much more from the heart. And so,
is science fiction one of your genres that you wrote too? Like, is that? I mean, if you can write, you can write. Is that something that you're thinking to entertain, or is that? I mean, if the 2 you wrote in college, and this certainly doesn't. It's funny, if you look on Goodreads and how people categorize it, sci-fi is one of the things. And I think there were 4 users. I was like, what? Like, this is not sci-fi, but this is science. So, I say go for it with science fiction. I think once you found your readers, you found your readers.
Oh, that's really kind. Thank you. I think it's funny when you really do something brand new, it's hard to know what it is. And I do believe that this is a very new story because it has a depth of emotion that's matched with a depth of information about reality. And I think that they are typically siloed. So I bring them together, it's not a chronological structure, which is interesting. There are flashbacks and then you skip lots of time. I won't give any spoilers, but in a story that explores time, I thought it was interesting to have an unusual structure. And so there is a lot that's different about this book, and it's led to different categorizations. So I think right now it might be shelved as a romance, but I have people who feel very strongly, who have come to me and said, this is not a romance. You are, people who want a romance might not like this because it is closer to literary fiction or a different genre, in that it delves into all of these scientific ideas, and it is not a typically happy story in the way that you might expect a rom-com involving a trope might develop. So it's a little bit different, but.
As far as love and time being the two main concepts throughout the book, later we see, just as a non-spoiler, Sophie becomes to realize how we can compare love and time and their continuum together. How do you feel the cover art? Did you get input? Was that into your care? I mean, you have time and you have love. So how were you a part of this? Was this something you asked for? Did you, I don't know. I know different authors have different contractual obligations with what they can put into their cover art.
That's really interesting. I, as a writer, I typically feel like I have no leverage, to be honest. So whatever terms I'm given, I accept. I'm like, great, I'm happy to be here.
Okay.
I was actually given some input on the cover in my contract, which I was not expecting, and I was very happy to. But I saw something that's very similar to the current cover, and I did not have meaningful input at that point because I did really like it. The only substantial change was that the original cover had block letters, and that was changed to a serif font because it was said that that would suggest the story was more serious with a serif title than block letters might suggest.
I think I may have that.
Oh, no, that had, the original block letters were like Comic Sans. They were.
Oh, like this, like,
Yeah.
Okay, I see. Okay.
Yeah, but
I love the equations in the background.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's a great cover, and it's very different from your other book, which definitely shows I felt like they were different genres. So I think that if, you definitely were looking for a little bit more, okay, I'm getting a message I got a message that says my internet is unstable. So I just got a little nervous there. Sophie, as you explained, she is a prodigy. She basically lives this very isolated life and has sadly really no friends. She's one of those kids that finds her haven within books, so much so that her home, she's an only child, has a library that uses the Dewey Decimal System within their home, which I just like. I love that. I was cracking up. Like, we're reading from the fairy tales tonight at 984 point whatever. I thought that was really sweet. But her mom, the relationship, her mom almost foresaw how her life would be, that if she did not start talking to people. And I'm just going to say this one part. Sophie got her report card, and almost every teacher commented that she was a prodigy. And Sophie said, well, I can do better. And her mom says, well, I want you to do worse. And Sophie just looks at her mom and says, I love you. And this I just thought was powerful. She said Sophie hugged Isabelle in public, but Isabelle, the mother, was convinced that giving love was only half the way to happiness. The other half was to receive it. Sophie could give her love away to books and ideas, but those would never love her back. And she said, all of that starts with talking to other people. And I just thought her mother did, so much to try and raise her EQ, her emotional quotient, at a young age. And she just wasn't ready for it. I kind of loved their relationship. Was that something, that was it natural for you to find that way, that a mother would want her kid to not, I hear parents now, the ones that say they have gifted kids. If my kids would get out of a book and start playing Xbox or run around the backyard, I'd be so happy. And this was her. She really lived that life.
Yeah. So. Well, I think that I really enjoyed crafting the relationship between Isabelle and Sophie. And I do view Isabelle as the source of the tools that Sophie draws on later in life. And one of those tools, this is no spoilers, is the value of intuition. And so this is something that has been important to me personally that did show up in my writing. And I think that it's an idea that I got from yoga. So I started practicing yoga in my 20s while I was working in finance. And I found that for the first time, I was creating space for nothing in a very busy schedule. And in that space of nothing, I was able to hear my own inner voice in a way that I hadn't before. And I really fell in love with yoga. It was very transformational for me because it was the opposite of all the messages that I was getting in my daily life and finance. So for the first time, I was hearing do less, slow down, listen to your body, be calm. And I did hear my intuition. And so I think that some of the lessons that I learned from that place in my life come out in Isabelle in moments like that and throughout the book. And they teach Sophie the lessons to be a more balanced and connected person. So I am drawing from things that I've learned and I'm maybe talking to a younger version of myself through an older version of myself, Isabelle to Sophie. I love how nurturing and warm and permissive their relationship is. It's a really beautiful thing that came out, and I'm very happy with that.
Yeah, you can give kids as many tools to fit in a toolbox, but if they don't, it's their choice whether or not to use them, or they have to use them when they're ready. I did find later on in the book, when Sophie's very upset, she calls her mom, but she hangs up quickly because she knows her mom's going to ask the questions that are going to break her. And I feel that that's true with a lot of mother-daughter relationships, because your mother, they're wiser. They've been through this stuff. They know stuff. And I also just wanted to comment, your use of time was so ever present within the book that little things when Sophie shows up late to class and her professor says, this is a class on time. You know, there's so many references to time in different nuances that didn't go unnoticed, at least by this reader. So they were peppered throughout, and I appreciate that. I really like that.
Thank you so much.
So as far as intuition, whenever Jake, her boyfriend, Sophie's boyfriend, Jake Fitzpatrick, says, I love you, she says, I know, which is a sign of intuition. Was that why you chose to have that little love way of saying I love you to each other, that she never really said it back? She always just said, I know?
Thank you for asking that. So in Jake's and Sophie's relationship, they do have this refrain where he says, I love you, and she says, I know. And I think that there are a couple of layers to that. And one of them is definitely the idea of intuition, that she has the answers inside of her. And no spoilers, this becomes important to her as she is the only one who believes something later on, and she has to decide whether or not she's really going to trust herself. And I think that the second layer to that is I wanted to craft Sophie as a true genius and prodigy, and not just a genius of the mind, but a genius of the heart. She can empathize, sympathize, show incredible compassion. She has incredible tenderness and emotional depth. And so in saying, I know, it's to reinforce this idea that she has the answers. And then over the course of the book, she does come to more significant conclusions about space and time, about love. And so the setup of she knows is, in my mind, letting credibility to her throughout the book that Sophie is the one who knows.
She does know.
Yeah.
On day one, Sophie meets Jake and they have this immediate connection. Do you believe in that immediate connection you can have with another person? I know in one part of the book you talked about the particles or something having a pair, a match. I don't remember what the word was, but everything has a match in science. And they found it, and they had this like visceral reaction to one another when they were, one was on a balcony, one was on the ground, but they knew. Do you believe in that?
Absolutely. I absolutely believe in very deep connections that you feel instantly. And it's not just pheromones and it's not just biology. It's filled with intricacies. And I've definitely felt that in my life. And I'm sure everyone else on this call has felt that as well. And I think as important as that idea of resonating deeply with someone when you meet is in this book, there's a related idea, which is extremely important, and that is that people stay with you when they are not there. And so that was the original idea when I started to write this book, was I wanted to express this emotion of people can leave your life, but they will not leave your heart. And it's related to the line by E.E. Cummings, I carry your heart with me, I carry it in my heart. And the line by Rumi, goodbyes are only for those who love with their eyes, because for those who love with heart and soul, there's no such thing as separation. And so I do believe in a connection, that's not just intense when you meet, but a connection that lingers after that person is gone. And that was my original intent with the book. I wanted that feeling to just bleed out of the pages. It's in the opening quote by Victoria Erickson when you open the book.
Oh, yeah.
And when I zoom into book clubs, I see that resonating with people who have suffered recent losses. And it is really something to see this book find someone in a moment where they're suffering from a recent personal loss, because I've seen it offer some comfort to people who are grieving. And so that's something that has been really significant to witness up close. And I'm grateful for those moments. But it is the idea that when someone leaves your life, they don't leave your heart, and you can stay with each other when you are not physically together.
Right. And I think that's a beautiful sentiment, and I think it's a powerful sentiment. And I was glad you brought up the part, Sophie has a mentor. So we'll talk about them in a minute, but this mentor reveals something personal about a loss. And because I was wondering, when you were talking about this continuum and this block theory, what about death? And so you brought that, and you answered a lot of questions with that. So mentors, Sophie has a mentor that becomes like family. And Jake also finds himself in his boss, a mentor that also somewhat becomes a mentor. And he says something really important to him. He says, who's waiting? He's in finance like you were. So his whole life is, work. And he doesn't stop, because that's his wish, is to always just so you know, he's driven by scarcity. This is to the crowd. So for him, his world is about making as much money as he can so that he never has to, worry. And he says, who's waiting for you at the finish line? You can't double down on work forever. That's not success. And I just got the chills reading that. I mean, I think that
Thank you.
it's so, I think these kids, the young ones, I mean, both of my son graduated 3 years ago, and he's in that, he saw kids and he's like, oh my God, Mom, they're making, such bank, and they're my age. And but they don't have a life. They can't go out. And they wonder why. And it's just so, I think that that's power. But you brought in very powerful mentors for both of your main characters. Did you ever have a mentor that you utilized, that you found mentorship an important part of your life?
Thank you for asking. And absolutely. And I think I was lucky in that I was encouraged to find mentors from a young age. So I consider the professor who I worked with senior year of college when I wrote that novel for credit a mentor. We actually met in a structure that is identical to Sophie and her mentor. So we met once a week for 2 hours to review the pages. So I drew from that. And I was actually recently in conversation with him about this book, and that was a really cool moment. And I didn't mention the symmetry, but I'm sure he saw it. And so I have definitely sought out mentors, especially other authors. As I get older, I like to see what does it actually take to make it in the field and hear it from people who are there. So I do listen for tips. I listen to what most professional novelists refer to as their daily word count. And I'm always, people will reveal what their process is. And so I'm always staying attuned and trying to learn from them. And I found authors are very inclined to offer help. So I've overcome the fear of asking for help when I need it and for reaching out if I have a question, because they've really been a really welcoming community.
Do you write every day?
I do, yes. I think that I try to write at least 1,000 words on whatever story I'm working a day. I work starting first thing in the morning. I have my best energy in the morning, and I try to hold regular office hours and treat it like a job. And that's my main process.
So Stephen King says the hardest part of writing is right before you start. What has been the hardest part for you?
That's an interesting question. The hardest part. I think that it's a fact that no matter who you are and what you write, there will be people who don't like it. And I think that dealing with that emotionally was probably the hardest part, because it takes so much optimism and self-belief to undertake a novel and then finish it. It's insane. And it's always, it's even longer than you think. You know it's going to be a long time, and you've done the inner work to make it there, and then it's even longer. And so to have that self-belief to make it to that point and then to go out into the world, it's very interesting, because no one who reads it wrote it meaning that they don't have any attachment to it. And
right.
So it's just, that was the hardest part, was getting bad reviews for the first time. And I think I've really learned from that. And so what I've come to in order to cope with that is, I think, one, is there anything that I can learn from this? So this is my response. And is there anything I can learn from this? And then if there is, then I learn from it. And if there's not, then I don't. And then I ask a second question, which is this person in my target audience? And sometimes people don't like, so the love proof resonates best with older people and who may or may not have had a significant loss in their life. And it resonates least well with college students. And I've realized that's because that is an invincible period in one's life. And this is a really tender book that addresses some of the more humbler moments of loss and dealing with your own fragility. And so when I see it not resonate with that age group, I think, okay, that makes sense. And that's easier for me to deal with. And then the last part of coping with that is recognizing that it comes down to a battle of wills. And a down vote is one will, and then your own vote is another, and one person will win. So that's obviously
there's authors that don't even read the reviews. They've just said it's not worth it. I did an interview on Saturday, and the author said, I mean, she's New York Times bestseller. She wrote, if I get a 1, I am confident enough that I don't care. Like that I just, 1 or 2, I just, they don't get it. She goes, a 3, that's what kills me. You know, the 3's that like, why? Like, so it was just an interesting way to look at it, that 3s were way worse for her than the 1. So I do think that's something, you know, that's got to be tough. I can imagine. Sophie is a minefield full of brilliance, and you chose to keep her dressed in, she kind of reminded me of like still wearing justice clothes, like, you know, with little flowers and roses on her shoes. And even though that can be trendy for the teen set, it just was still very juvenile, as well as, I mean, her food choices and my food choices are kind of similar, but I am going to say they're quite childlike. You know, what's your favorite food? Donuts. I mean, so can you talk to that imbalance there of her brain?
Absolutely. So I chose to have these juvenile details to Sophie for a specific reason. And it actually goes back to college when I took a course called Unpacking the Nature of Genius. And this was an unusual seminar taught by a member of the music school, where he took a group of people commonly thought to be geniuses, and then he looked for the traits that were shared among them. And this was a group of Leonardo da Vinci and Mozart and Isaac Newton.
Wow.
And one of the traits was a childlike sensibility. And so if we think to Einstein, we remember the iconic pictures of playfulness with his tongue out and his childlike wonder of the universe and trying to understand it. And Mozart, he would play juvenile jokes on his colleagues. And so he found these childlike instances with all of these geniuses. And that really stuck with me because it was so counterintuitive. And so with
Makes sense.
Sophie, I was very intentional about making part of her childlike. And so she has these beaded designs of animals on her clothes. She has roses on her sneakers that are very whimsical and girly. And she has this incredible sweet tooth, which is just a level beyond anything that's really desirable for an adult. And so that is to underscore the nature of her as a real genius.
Interesting. Jake, I have a couple questions. So Jake at the beginning, this is like right at the very beginning, but so I don't think I'm giving a spoiler, but he does run into his dad that he's been estranged from for 5 years. They don't say anything. When Jake becomes successful, I was really expecting the dad to come back. Was that ever an idea in your mind?
Yes,
I was waiting and waiting for it. I'm like,
yeah, you know what?
I thought because he had money, he'd want to come back to him.
Right. Well, I did think very seriously about that, but I decided that I wanted Jake's dad's defining trait to be absence. And so I think that because that was so influential on Jake, to not have him be there was his essence. It was his impact on Jake was his dad was not around. And so that is why he did not come back in the end. And however, I am thinking about a sequel. And so I think that there is opportunity for the story to get more interesting with that relationship, but not in this book.
Okay, that was one of my follow-up questions. Will we see any of these characters again? There were some left, even Jake's mom and her reaction to Sophie. I mean, there were a lot of things I wanted. Why was the reaction like that? I mean, we can all imagine why, but of course we want to know what your reason is. You're the story crafter. So, that was kind of there. So yeah, I'd be happy to see them again. Well, for someone like Jake, and you probably saw this in your career, even in your short time there, are there people that it's just never enough and they'll just keep going and going and going?
Absolutely. But I think that applies to every field. I think that it's not just people in finance who reach a certain goal and find that it doesn't sate them. I think it's in every field, and there are extremely competitive people who write love stories and I find them. They're in my world. So I think that it's not just a finance thing. I think it's the nature of being human.
Well, maybe this is more Jake and his dream to have everything. Sophie's wanted to know everything and Jake wanted to have everything. And that was, they both had these big lofty goals. So that's kind of.
Yeah, I think that finance is an interesting field because you can be rewarded beyond your wildest dreams and have it have nothing to do with your ability to connect with other people. And I think that that's really interesting. And I mean, in my short time that I was in finance, I did notice that there was no reward for connection, and it was not something that was being cultivated. And so when I left the field, I wanted to write something that was rich with all of the things that my life previously lacked. So heart and soul, and the importance of connection to transform and nourish people. And it was very reactionary to my experience until then. But yeah, everybody has their own appetite for connection, and for those, everyone finds where they need to be.
So the big theory going along in the book, the proof that they're working with, it kind of comes up as the block theory, which was unbeknownst to me. I had never heard of it, but again, I don't read. You have a much better science, just general background. What did you major in?
Psychology, but I took physics and chemistry and biology and neuroscience.
Okay, so this comes more naturally to you. So this is what block theory is. It's every moment of your life is out there somewhere in space-time. According to the theory, the universe is a giant block of all things that ever happen at any time in any place. So on this view, which still I don't get, but I believe it, what it says, I don't get it though. On this view, the past, the present, and the future all exist and are equally real. And at the same time, right?
Yes.
So can you explain that much better than what I
Absolutely.
just said?
Okay, so something interesting is that my intent with writing this book was to write a very deep and emotional love story. So I do that, and then it goes out into the world. And the first reviews that come back is how scientific and informative it is. And that was very interesting to me because my process for incorporating information was very emotion first. So I would think, what do I want people to feel? And then I would find the facts that would heighten and accentuate that feeling. So, for instance, Sophie and Jake have a ritual before they go to sleep where Sophie teaches Jake something about the universe. And so, in one of these,
Love them. I
thank
feel like
you.
I can play Jeopardy better on TV. I mean, it's totally were fantastic.
Thank you. And so in one of those moments, she teaches him that when you put together two pieces of matter in a vacuum, they fuse together indefinitely. And that fact is meant to underscore their connection and how they are fusing in that moment. And so block theory, there was the emotion in front of that was the idea that when people leave your life, they don't leave your heart. And so I went looking around for the facts to express that idea. And I found this theory, block theory, which is a real theory discussed at the highest levels of physics today. And it states that the past, present, and future all exist at once. And it's just the nature of how we are made that we experience it flowing linearly, but that's not the reality of it. And so I thought, wow, the fact that the past and the present might exist at once would mean that they are as much with me as they are not. And I thought that that was just the perfect scientific expression of the idea that deep connections last forever. And so I appreciate that there is a lot of information, but I really tried my best to make it very emotional and to underscore the power of connection.
It worked. I mean, I think it was, I just think it worked in a very pleasant way because you never felt like I was learning, but I was never being lectured to. And I think when anybody who reads, part of reading is knowledge, and but we don't ever want to be told, you know, that. So I think the way you brought it about was really good. Are you able to read books while you write?
I love reading while I write, and I find that I always want to get better. So I think reading is a form of studying. What stories work. I'm obsessed with Kristen Hanna right now. I'm reading The Great Alone, and
It was one of her best. Yeah.
Yeah, well, I just finished The Nightingale, and her books they are heart-wrenching. She goes there, and so I'm studying like the epic structure because I would like to emulate that one.
Okay. We have a question from Lewis Goldman. He says, can you recommend a good book for a layman on a broad range of physics topics?
Sure. How about Astrophysics for People in a Hurry? I think it's by Neil deGrasse Tyson, and it gives an overview of a lot of really interesting subjects in the field for people who don't have a lot of time.
Right. Well, that says it right in the title.
Yeah.
So hopefully he heard that, or maybe someone can type that into the comments.
Yeah. That's
let me see, was there anything in the book that was edited out that you wanted in?
Ooh, not that I wanted in, but there was definitely a lot that was cut. I would say at one point, a third of it was cut down to its current size. Yeah, a lot was edited out.
I'm trying, how many pages is it?
304.
Yeah, this version's this is 276 with your acknowledgement. So
yeah.
Wow, 304, but that's a good amount. I like that. If you could bring home one of your characters for lunch or dinner or drink, who would you pick?
Wow. That's an fascinating question. I would pick Isabelle because she is a source of so much wisdom in the book. I would just want to absorb all of her lessons.
Wow, that's a good pick. You know what, I wanted to picture, I would love to picture her better. Like she was just like this Isabelle, like she just worked so well.
Yeah.
You know, her relationship with Ronald was so different too. You know, there were a lot of different good relationships to look at.
Hmm.
And your ending, was that always the ending?
It actually was not. So I had a darker end at one point, and I sent it in to my agent, and she said, "Do you really want to do this?" And we made it feel better.
Okay, well, that's fair. I liked the ending. I thought it kind of like brought it all together. Could you cast this for us?
Oh, absolutely. So I would cast in the role of Sophie, young Sophie, Dakota Fanning. And that is because she is very youthful in appearance. She has that bright blonde hair. She's all the appearance boxes checked for Sophie. And she has this otherworldly element to her. I think that because of her roles in Twilight. And Sophie,
Ethereal, just that kind of-
exactly. And Sophie, as a physics genius, I'm often talking about her having a supernatural presence, and there are allusions to Alice in Wonderland and this not quite real element about her. And so I think that Dakota Fanning captures that to an extent. And I think for older Sophie, I would cast Meryl Streep because she has the stature and the composure of someone with the legacy that Sophie ultimately has. And also I want it to be a big movie, so got to get Meryl in there. And
yeah. I was thinking more Glenn Close, but I'll take Meryl Streep.
That's a great, well, I think, was she in Fatal Attraction?
I only remember Sharon Stone from that.
Oh, yeah.
But she may have been.
Right. Okay. So, and then for Jake, I would cast young Jake would be Dylan O'Brien, and he is the star of the Maze Runner movies.
Oh, I like those movies.
Yeah. So he has this very driven aspect to him, which is similar to Jake, and he has the sharp jaw. And so I see a lot in common for them. And then for older Jake, maybe Hugh Jackman.
I don't know how he would compare to the kid though.
Yeah, that's true. But I care more about matching to Dylan than to matching to Hugh. So
yeah, that's right. I would too. That's interesting. Do you use that when you, I saw Jamie Benner today, her new book Blush comes out, I don't know, in late summer. And she posted on Instagram all her vision boards of what her characters look like. And they were all famous people.
Oh, interesting.
And I've seen a couple others do that, but I wonder when you're writing, because I know most of us read as a movie in our head. So I would imagine writing it would kind of be the same, or no, is it?
You know, I actually have changed. So when I was writing Breathe In, Cash Out, my mom actually made a vision board of who. Yeah, she's very supportive. She's amazing. And I was more aware and imaginative of the adaptation at that point. At this point, I've really let that go. I think that I write to make a great book more than a great adaptation. I care a lot about the language. So I really tried to write the Love Proof with really beautiful prose, really lovely turns of phrase, and I cared a lot about the actual language, which is something that might be lost in an adaptation. So I pay more attention to the actual book.
Well, I appreciate it. What is your favorite word?
My favorite word? Whoa. Dang, I don't even have one. That's awful. I don't have one. I'm so embarrassed, but I love them all.
What words do you have any word that you hate?
No, but I've been using the word autodidactic a lot recently, which is a nice one. It means self-taught.
Yeah.
So that it's a fun one to have in the mouth.
So your new book is called Food Fight that you're working on now. Has that been submitted, or are you just?
No, it is with my agent right now. So.
Okay, and the food fight can mean a lot of things, but I did look at your food fight Instagram page and it is just loaded with food. So I think it is a very literal meaning, unless I'm missing something.
Right. So that is a different book, and that takes place in a fine dining French restaurant in New York City. And before the pandemic, I sat in on kitchens and interviewed chefs and cooks. So I do paint an authentic portrait of a French restaurant in Manhattan. And in the story, the dad has worked at this French restaurant, and his daughter, he runs it, and his daughter has worked by his side diligently for a decade. Meanwhile, her twin brother went his own way, and he started a restaurant putting burgers between waffles and pancakes and whole slices of cake, and he soared to fame as a celebrity chef. But what begins, it might appear that this is an amusing story about family dynamics, but ultimately it gets more into the daughter's psyche, and things are not as they seem. And it's interesting because it has a lot of sensory detail and it plays with your senses.
Interesting. When's that? When do they have a guess to the release date?
Aiming for 2022.
Okay. Well, you released this one, kind of still pandemic.
Yes,
People were
true.
still out vaccines. So do you think it's been different with having these? Did you have as many Zoom events as you did with the first book? Or is it more?
I had more Zoom events, more events for this book. And I think that it's a double-edged sword because you lose the in-person contact, but you gain breadth. So it's a trade-off, and I'll be interested to see if Zoom events continue for book tours beyond the pandemic.
They will for Good Book Fairy. I love it.
That's great.
So I think it's the best. I just love it, and I think people like being able. Sometimes it's raining, you don't want to go out. You want to, I think it's working for a lot of people. So
Absolutely. Yeah.
So I'm just going to let the crowd know we have about 5 more minutes. So if you have any other questions, let me know. And then otherwise, I'm just going to, this is something I always ask. And usually I give this to you first, but if you had to describe your book in 3 words, doesn't have to be a sentence, just 3 words, how would you describe it?
Love never leaves.
Oh, so you did do a sentence. Gosh. Okay. So love never leaves. I think it's great. I think it's great. There's a part in the book where she says, when she walks in with her mentor and she says, it doesn't sound scientific yet, but the way to see time is to fall in love. And I love that line too, because I do think, we do have a question coming in, but I did love that statement. I think it just makes love. I mean, you're a newlywed. I think right? You're not married yet, are you?
We get married in September, so I'm almost newlywed.
Almost. Yeah. So you're almost there, but I think that you could almost feel that a little bit in the book. You are in deep love. So
still optimistic, yeah.
This is from Rana Wallishin. It says, I am 1/3 of the way through the book and loving it. It is particularly moving to me since I am grieving a recent loss. Aw.
Well, thank you for sharing that, Rana. I appreciate it. That's meaningful. Thank you.
Yeah, well, that's good. If it can heal you. Rana is a big library patron, and I know she comes to most of my events, and she was going through a session where every book she picked up after her loss had somebody dying. And she was just like, please give me a book where no one dies. So this is their perfect pick for you, Rana. She said this book has been a comfort. All right. Anything else you want to share with us?
Just that I really appreciate your time. I'm a big fan, and I really appreciate reading and your time tonight. And it's been a real joy.
My pleasure. You're great to talk to. I appreciate it.
Madeleine and Lauren, thank you so much for the wonderful conversation. Madeleine, I love the sentiments that you shared about the book and your sentence that love never leaves. And that's so touching. Lauren, we love your thematic wardrobe that you wore tonight and all the great questions that you asked. I want to remind everyone that if you have additional questions, please drop them in the chat box and we will get to them. while you're doing that, I also wanted to point out that thank you to the Book Bin for partnering with us. The Book Bin's located in Northbrook. There is a link in the chat box to purchase the Love Proof. So you can find the information there. And also to remind everyone that we are recording the program tonight. You can find it on your library's YouTube channels early next week or sometime next week. Again, we put the link to the Book Bin in the chat box, so you can copy that into your browser and purchase a copy of Madeleine's book. Oh, we had one other question. Madeleine, you mentioned that you're reading Kristen Hannah. For both of this question is for both you and Lauren. Are there what other books are on your nightstand at the moment?
I just looked at my nightstand and I saw Devotions by Mary Oliver, which I loved. I just finished it before the Nightingale.
I just read Jillian Cantor's Half-Life, which is about Marie Curie, which I loved. Again, it was a learning experience, and her books are always a joy. And I was telling the librarians before, Stephanie Drey's The Women of Chateau Lafayette is also a brilliant book. If you're looking for saga, that's a saga. And boy, I don't know. I'm reading, I have 3 going at all times, but those are the 2 I'd probably shout out about right now. So I just finished.
Great, thank you guys both for those recommendations. There's one more question in the Q&A, and it's from Natasha, and she wants to know, how much do you listen to your intuition?
I am a very intuitive person, and I do recruit my intuition for every major decision. So a lot.
That's a great skill, because sometimes what I'll think, use your head or your heart. And they just, it's like they're talking to each other, and I just wish I could pick one. So you've actually got a very good ability to narrow it down to the right thing.
Thank you. I don't see any additional questions. I think, Lauren, you covered so much ground with your questions. So thank you to everyone. Again, Madeleine and Lauren, thank you both for this great evening, and best of luck, Madeleine, with the Love Proof. And I invite my fellow librarians to come on and say good night as we all thank you and wish everyone a good evening.
Thank you for hosting this. It was great.
Good night, everyone. Thank you.
Good night.
Thanks for coming.
Good night. Thanks.